we should be embracing and continuing to embrace where we are in the resource sector. We should do that, and we have to figure out how to get that right.
Bank of Canada is the only central bank of the G7 countries with no gold in its reserve.
Yeah, well, look, I disagree with the policy. You know, when I see the instability, I feel that people are still moving towards it. So, you know, where does gold go? I would never project a number myself. I look to see what European banks are saying.
Resource stock investors depend not just on bullish market forces, but also a strong management team and good government policies in the jurisdiction in which the company operates. So here to talk about what is next for Canadian mining policies and the future of gold is Ranj Pillai, former Premier of the territory of Yukon in Canada and currently CEO and President of SEVA Mining. That's SEVA, S-E-V-A, ticker S-E-V-A on the TSXV. Ranj, an honor to finally host you on the show. Welcome to the podcast.
It's great to see you again. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Ranj, what's it like switching from government to the private sector? Let's just start with that.
It's fantastic. Look, I worked in the sector previous to getting into politics. I really appreciated the experience I had a lot of fun doing the work previously. So, you know, going back to this and a lot of learning. You know, you're moving from being in a decade into the policy work, now coming back into the mining sector, coming back into private business. So sort of retraining how you think about, you know, the activities that you have in front of you, how you have to build a whole different network of individuals, of course, in mining, whether it's with capital markets or the technical teams that we rely on. So a lot of learning, but a lot of fun learning. And so really enjoying it.
We're going to get into jurisdiction and mining in just a bit in more detail, but from your experiences in operating in the territory of Yukon, what can you basically add to a management team that a traditional CEO coming from a geologist background or let's say a banking background doesn't have?
Yeah, look, I'm very open with our team on the things that I need support on. Like, I'm not coming in as a geologist. I'm not coming in as an engineer. Luckily, I've got two phenomenal people, Carl Ginn and Ryan Brown, working with us on our SEVA project and supporting me. But I'm really focusing on, you know, from leadership skills around building our team and moving things forward. And the key to our project, like many projects in the country, is making sure that we have good relationships with the communities that we want to work with. I spent a lot of time over the last 15 years, either advising First Nation governments, negotiating, whether it was in municipal government or in the territorial government, sitting at the table, you know, getting to understand what the priorities were of many communities. There's a lot of similarities across this country where communities want to go. But I think it's just that understanding that you have to really make sure you spend the time and understand what the priorities are and the uniqueness of each community. And then how do you marry that with the supports you can bring to the table, the opportunities that the sector can bring to the table, and how do you build true partnerships? So, I mean, that's a lot of the work I'm focusing on in this role.
According to the Toronto Stock Exchange website, 40% of the world's public mining companies are listed on the TSX and TSX Venture Exchange. So with gold at $4,600, $4,700 today, what does a high gold price, and by high I mean subjectively high, $4,600, what does a gold price that's up 150% mean for the Canadian economy?
Oh, look, I think that the country's underappreciated what gold does for this country for a long time. You know, a great lesson that I learned while in office was in 2020 and 2021. You know, we had a global pandemic, and there was two regions in the country that saw actual GDP growth. One of them was the Yukon, and the other one was Nunavut. And it was gold producers. Of course, in the Yukon, you have that traditional placer mining that's gone on for a long time, but it was hard rock gold miners and placer mining that drove that growth. And then, you know that Agnico has a huge footprint and a lot of activity happening in Nunavut. And I think it spoke for itself. It was the insurance policy for regions in the country when there's volatility. And that's really, you know, the thought process I always use when we look at what's happening globally now. This has been the standard that people have moved towards for thousands of years. Different sovereign dollars have come and gone, but when we think about Canada, it should not just be about critical minerals, which are incredibly important and a significant opportunity for the country, but we should always be thinking that, that gold plays a big role and can play a big role. It has over the last number of years and should continue to.
Some analysts and economists have told me that one of the reasons for why gold has appreciated so much in the last 2 years is because of central bank buying, strong central bank demand. Is there still a reason for a strong central bank demand for gold to continue, even at almost $5,000 an ounce, Ranj?
Look, I try to do my research, which is part of the role I have, and I'm not coming from a background where I'm an economist, but I'm watching trends, and I see a few different things that lead me to believe that the buying will continue. First of all, we're seeing the table reset. So we see BRICS buying a lot more gold. We're seeing, I think it's gone from 11% to 17% of global reserves now moving over into the BRICS area. We're seeing ETFs, the strength. I think even this morning, there was a launch today in Hong Kong of another gold ETF, their largest that they've launched over the last number of years. I take a look at that. And then, when I see the instability, I feel that people are still moving towards it. So, where does gold go? I would never project a number myself. I look to see what European banks are saying. I'm looking to see what Wells Fargo is saying. We're the word that they're sort of sharing with the investment world is that $6,000 gold is attainable. Here with SEVA and in the team that I work with at the Fiore Group, we like hearing that. That's a bet we're all making here. But again, I think when we think about central banks, we think about BRICS. These trends have gone on for so long. And with, again, the volatility that we're seeing globally and the resetting of who are allies, who are working together, where there's disruption, I would think that we're going to continue to see the strength in the gold market.
One thing that puzzled me is why there's so much mining activity in Canada and why resources are so important. Gold, silver, other critical minerals are so important to the Canadian economy, but yet the Central Bank of Canada, the Bank of Canada, is the only central bank of the G7 countries with no gold in its reserves. The Bank of Canada began selling gold some 20 years ago. It was a decades-long process. It has not made any announcements or plans to buy back any gold. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, look, I disagree with the policy. I know if you sat down and and there was a justification, I'm sure that was strong at the time, and I've read a little bit about what the thoughts were, but I think it's not. I think it's something that we should revisit. It's the same thing. We have some of the strongest pension funds in the world, and there's that interest of saying, look, we know you do incredible in your investment policies with a lot of global investment, but there's an opportunity here at home, and how do you make sure that you define a policy that can also ensure that our country gets stronger, that we have the right resources and tools available to us that can continue to build this country. We've all got a wake-up call over the last year or so that we have to make sure that we're standing strong on our own 2 feet, and things like continuing to see a support for the gold sector, even at home, as you are alluding to, or making sure that the money that we have access to as a country can still be looking to, that we still believe that Canada is a good bet, is something I think that we should always continue to think about.
According to Ipsos, which is a global polling firm, many Canadians, the majority of Canadians now openly distrust the Americans. I'm not saying that's an official policy of the Liberal government, but that's how Canadians who are surveyed feel. If the sentiment were to continue, Ranj, do you expect the Bank of Canada to be making some changes to its reserves away from the U.S. dollars into something like gold, for example?
Look, that's a big question, and I don't know. I wouldn't say that I'm qualified to speak on that.
Sure.
What I would say is that the folks at the Bank of Canada and what we're seeing, the posture of the federal government, is they're watching what's happening globally. They're watching what's happening with BRICS. They're watching what's happening in a move away with maybe some concern about the US dollar. We know that central bankers come together on an annual basis. They're looking at what each other's positions are, how they are moving ahead with policy. So, look, I wouldn't be shocked if that's not a conversation that's pretty active these days.
I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about the future of the Canadian economy. His position was that resources will continue to be the main driver of economic growth, natural resources for Canada. I argued the Canadian government needs to try to find ways to diversify its revenue streams going forward. Where do you stand on this debate?
Oh, I think we have to do both. I mean, look, we should be looking to diversify. There's some things that are happening in the country, whether it's onshoring more of our defense spending, because we're seeing unparalleled defense spending happening. That's another place where there's a new pie that we can look at instead of slicing the pie up into smaller pieces. But look, we should be embracing and continuing to embrace where we are in the resource sector. We should do that, and we have to figure out how to get that right. South of us, we're seeing in the U.S. some, the public service and the federal government in the United States are moving with such a sense of urgency when it comes to critical minerals, and that's something I know that Canada is trying to retool how they're approaching things on policy, on whether it's how we go through a permitting process, which I think all provinces and territories are consistently trying to improve, and how the federal government will play a role to support that. We've seen some new legislation come through, trying to make sure that there's a one window permanent process. All of those things are going to be really important, but they have to be executed. It's not just about talking about that policy. It has to move into a place where it's operationalized. And I think we really have to take seriously opportunities that are in front of us and how we do not use those opportunities over the short run. Because, again, we're seeing countries like the US really moving quickly to onshore processing when it comes to critical minerals, and ensuring that they're supporting, the industry. Bilateral agreements being signed between both the state and the federal government in the US. I know I think there's one agreement of its type that's been signed in Canada that I'm aware of, which is between the federal government and British Columbia. We see Ontario, of course, where we're working. There's a lot of work being done between the province and Ontario and the federal government, as we see, some of these new things like the support towards the Ring of Fire, the infrastructure that's going in across Ontario, and their ability to reduce red tape for the mining sector, and moving, I think, now number 2 in the world as a destination for mining investment. When you look at the Fraser Institute report,
the federal government's attitude towards mining, how has that changed from when you were in office to now?
180. Look, I always judged it by, you would always have mines ministers attend PDAC, right? So and at one point I had an opportunity to chair that table, and you would bring everybody together at the annual conference. The federal ministers there and all the provincial and territorial ministers are there. That's usually what you would see. I think in the previous prime minister had shown up at PDAC, and it kind of made a lot of noise. We now see in this country multiple premiers showing up to make, and not just to show up, but making announcements for their jurisdiction. And that's coast to coast to coast. It's happening. We see the federal government with multiple ministers there. So, I always felt, I can remember wanting to speak about mining at in different opportunities within the political world. And there was really, in 2016, 2017, coming into this job, or the previous job, I should say, there wasn't a lot of appetite. Now, of course, we see it becoming a household conversation when we talk about critical minerals. And of course, that's now translated into the political class understanding that it is incredibly important. They need to be aware of the opportunities. And look, in that world, it's a positive place for a politician to stand on, saying that they need to support that sector in this country.
What triggered these changes in attitude? From a perspective of someone who may not be a Canadian watching this, they're probably asking, well, it's still the same Liberal government, just with a different prime minister and different cabinet. But what changed?
Well, look, I think you see with Carney in place, that his perspective on resource development, on driving the economy, the importance of it, look, he speaks to that all the time, and understands the vulnerability that we were in when it came to critical minerals. And I think a lot of countries, whether it's European countries, look, I spent a lot of time over the last number of years sitting with European diplomats coming to Canada to understand. They knew the importance of having partnership with us. They knew the importance of making sure that they partnered with Canada or Canadian companies or invested in Canadian companies to look at making sure they could have offtake, because they knew that there was 1 to 2 countries in the world that had dominated the sector. And in order to grow your economy, the things that we didn't, we're not touching on today, but like whether we're looking at how AI is driving the building of data centers, all of these different areas in our economy that are starting to really expand, it all comes back to critical minerals. It all comes back to mining. And it took a long time for people to understand just exactly what that supply chain looked like, how we could play a role in it. And it did. It took years for people to actually get up to speed on what a lot of mining companies had been saying for a long time. And if you talk to longtime miners or majors or mid-tiers, they'll say, isn't it great that people are waking up to what, they're now calling them critical minerals. So everybody's excited about it. But we've been talking about this for a long, long time. And I think now it's become part of the commonplace conversation. And I think you do see federally a government that is really pushing towards how we have to flourish economically, and understanding that things like manufacturing, auto sector, they're all in a really difficult place right now. So when you look at how the table's set in the country, where else can you look? Well, of course, whether it's oil and gas or mining, these are areas that we know well in the country. There's lots of expertise. As you said, with the exchanges, we hold, there's a lot of activity on the capital markets in this country. The entire ecosystem exists that we have to expand on. So it's in place, and people see that.
For the investors watching the show right now, a lot of them prioritize permitting times in a jurisdiction when picking a company to invest in. And so one of the most commonly expressed frustrations from investors that I've talked with, or even industry leaders and executives, is I have to have a project in this particular place. It's going to take me 15 years to permit. What can be done to bring it down? Now, you were the premier of an actual territory, Yukon. And so you are in the perfect position to actually comment from an insider's perspective, A to Z, what needs to happen for permitting to take place. And so if an investor would ask you, Ranj, how can the government work together with the private sector, with indigenous communities, with all the actors in that province or territory to bring the permitting time down going forward? How would you answer that?
No, that's a really complex question, because each province and territory has a different structure. So when you look at what the federal government is rolling out now, this legislation, C5, which is the goal is to speed up and to have sort of the one process in place, that does not apply to the 3 territories in Canada, because in many cases, the 3 territories, when you're going through something like environmental assessment, the very first step, you're dealing with representatives that are from Indigenous governments, the federal government, and the territorial government. So territorial governments have one voice at that table, but a lot of those processes are all linked to federal legislation. So you actually have to change federal legislation to make sure that you can make the changes you want at the territorial level. So I just say that to illustrate the complexity of it, and you have to make sure that you have the support to make those changes federally. What I go back to, look, I'm on. As much as I appreciate having this conversation, I'm now on the other side of the table. So what I think about is, like our project with SEVA, first and foremost, the different approach we're taking is it's not just about making sure that we do the consultation that's required as a company. It's about building social capital with the communities we want to work with. And that's not just about making sure you have the proper impact and benefit agreement, that you come to the table and say, look, we're going to create X amount of jobs. The development corporations that are owned by the Indigenous governments are sitting there going, look, we want to have joint ventures on whatever it may be, exploration, drilling, road construction, the things that are normally opportunities, food services, camp, infrastructure, all of those opportunities. It's also about, in my mind, and maybe many in the sector will disagree, but the approach we're taking, and that I want to see our team undertake is, what are the priorities of each community? And in many cases, some of those priorities may be, look, we understand there's an opportunity in mining next door, but we really need to make sure that our citizens are healthy and supported. A lot of the communities have gone through tremendous trauma, and they're trying to make sure their citizens are okay. It's not just about making sure they have the financial abilities, but that we support and understand where they are. And then you can look to say, what are your priorities as a community? Understand that they're all unique, and it takes time. It takes an ability to spend time with those communities if you've built a relationship where you can, and then understand how you can work closely together for them to achieve their priorities, which in turn builds social capital. Social capital, and a pure element of that is trust. And of course, you want to then make sure that you can use that trust to start to build forward on a project. And that takes time. There's no shortcut for you or I to trust each other, but it takes time. And it still can be done, I believe, in the construct that we're working within, knowing that there's a lot of pressure to bring projects through and get them into production. If you're doing the projects right, you understand how to mitigate any environmental impacts. Like those things, there's no shortcuts on those, and that you're getting to a place where you've got community support and there's real benefit coming to the communities, not just Indigenous communities, the municipalities that you're working next to, the people of the region, all the people of the region, making sure where you're working, you can demonstrate that they see that opportunity. Look, I think those are key things, and making sure you're prepared when you're going through the application processes. I won't get into sort of the finite amounts of that, but like making sure that you're there and you're building an understanding of what government offices or environmental assessment offices or water licensing assessment, all the things you need, that you're really aware of what you need to provide in order to get where you want to go.
Okay, let's talk about Ontario as a jurisdiction. But before we get into the details of where SEVA is operating, which is Ontario, maybe just comment from a broader perspective. What makes a jurisdiction unique for mining investment? In other words, what does the government need to do to attract mining investment and capital into that province or territory?
Yeah, well, look, because of the previous work I did, I'm listening closely to see what is coming out of in this country, what's coming out of the Premier's office, what's coming out of the Mines Minister's office. I'm listening closely to what is being said by, if they have a minister that's in charge of Indigenous affairs for the province. And so when looking at Ontario, part of the things, I'm listening to what is coming out of Doug Ford's office. I'm listening to what's coming out of Stephen Lecce's office, what's coming, out of their departments. And, in where we're located, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs, Greg Rickford, is located, which I know because, I know him from working. He was the federal minister of natural resources before going back to provincial politics. So I know he also understands the mining sector. So those are all things that I'm thinking about. Then I'm looking to see, is the province or territory actually investing? Are they supporting mining companies to go out and market and to bring money into their territory? Are they paying for or helping pay for infrastructure that is required? Are they building programs, which we're seeing in Ontario and many different areas, where the Indigenous governments or corporations can either access grant money to play a part in the deal structure, in the business structure? Is there loan guarantees that can be backed? Those are all the things I'm looking at. And when I see, Ontario, there's a reason that they're where they stand as a investment destination. We see what's happening. Probably the Ring of Fire is the one that your listeners will, have heard of mostly. But I'm looking at the overall policy for the province, and are they really supporting mining? And do they understand it? And are they getting behind it? In any of the conversations I've had with officials in Ontario, my sense is they understand it. They can get into a dialogue with you where they really they have a education that's been put in place to, whether it's to understand junior mining, mid-tier, majors, production, exploration. They know what they're talking about. I want to not just have a quick sort of highlights of a political conversation, but are they prepared to really support the industry? and that's what, we feel good about. Where, as you said, we're in Northwestern Ontario, which has an incredibly long history, which I think is important too. You've got, I'll just share. Do you have multi-generational workforce? Do you have a long history of production? And those are all great things as well to be contemplating when you're looking to invest and build.
You brought up working with Indigenous communities several times. Is that because a lot of deposits in Canada are operating on Indigenous lands and territories?
Yeah, all of them. Yeah, right?
Okay.
All of them, right? So you're going to be on somebody's traditional territory somewhere in the country. So and mining happens, predominantly in rural Canada. And I could be proved wrong, but I don't think there's a project in the country where you're not going to be having a dialogue. So it's incredibly important. And when I look at what has caused challenges around projects, a lot of times it seems to be those relationships. So yeah, I put that as the number one priority for us, is to get those partnerships right.
Explain to investors watching the show the types of negotiations, just broadly speaking. I know every deal is different, every territory is different, but the types of negotiations that happens between the mining company and the local government and the Indigenous community, such that all actors involved, the three that I mentioned, have come to an agreement. So what is it that the Indigenous communities prioritize and want? What is it that the mining companies want? And how do they come to a consensus here?
Yeah. Let me speak about Northwestern Ontario. So
Sure.
In the area that we're in, there's 4 communities that we're looking to work closely with. They all fall under what is Treaty 3 in that area. And the overarching organization that represents these communities at Treaty 3 actually has laid out guidelines on what they would like to see companies do. And that goes from, as an example would be a letter of intent communicating that you're in the jurisdiction, you're looking to work in that traditional territory, moving next to an MOU. So you're sitting down, understanding how you're going to communicate, how you're going to report back on your activity, getting an understanding from those communities, again, about what's being undertaken and what their concerns are. Then moving into the next piece, which is a exploration agreement. And then if you're looking to maybe move, in our case, we have a large stockpile of gold that's historical. There's, $15 million of gold sitting at surface on our project that was mined a long time ago. If we were looking to then move that and mill it at another operation, we would be looking at then going to an advanced exploration agreement. So those are all things, of course, the Ministry of Mines is in Ontario, like any jurisdiction, is wondering and asking, have you met with the local communities? In some cases, if you've got a great relationship, you might have letters of support from those First Nations, because they're looking to partner with you and see that move forward. If there's been no dialogue, well, that could lead to a different type of response from those communities. But that's the type of thing. And then, for projects that are moving to really advanced exploration, you're likely getting into a deeper financial agreement. And then for companies that are in production, the bigger mid-tiers and others, then you're into an impact and benefit agreement, which would be much more, there'd be much more covered within that agreement, and it would likely clearly defined and sort of the economic relationship between the company and the community. So that's a sense for our jurisdiction. So, right now we're just in a position where, like, next week I'm in Kenora, meeting with all of the 4 communities. We're sitting down. We're at different places. There's, one community that has an exploration agreement signed. That was work that was done by our predecessor, and we're going to talk about that. There's other communities that are looking to sign that MOU stage and then moving towards exploration. So depending where it is, and look, I know it's difficult for many of the investors that watch your show. They want to hear, look, you've got all these things done and you're off to the next step. But for us, we've been trading for a month. We're brand new. And so we're at that period of building the foundation of relationships so that we're ready to go in, and we want to get a good field season in place. We want to go out and make sure that we think the resource can grow at the project that we have at Cameron Lake. So there's a number of things that are in front of us over 2026.
this is a map that is on your website. So $9.6 billion of M&A activity in the region. Maybe give us a sense of scale, please, on the type of M&A or the M&A that's been happening in the last year in Ontario, specifically that region, and why there's been so much M&A in that region.
Look, well, it goes back to a lot of the things we've talked about. Like, it is a very favorable area, and it's got a long history. And yeah, the slide right there, that shows that's since 2020. So it's almost $10 billion of M&A activity. Just south of us, Core has just purchased the Rainy River project. So on the map, you'll see that it's about 88 kilometers south of us. But the other thing that I like to share with people when you think about SEVA and why we're in a really good position is there's a number of companies that are working in these regions, and they're highlighted here that we have a really strong relationship with. First of all, First Mining. So we've acquired this property from First Mining. They still hold 44% of our company, and they own the Spring Pole project, which is now moving through to make a decision about going to production. Also, you'll see the Madsen project, which is West Red Lake. That's another company that has been supported and built out of the Fiore group of companies, the same as SEVA. And then as well, you'll see the Goliath property, which is Next Gold, which is another company that has been supported. So a lot of those companies, for those who don't know Fiore, there's probably a dozen companies right now that have come from Fiore. We're here in Vancouver. We've got 12 different companies that are all on a couple of floors of the building that we're in Vancouver. So a lot of people know each other. It's an opportunity to talk about like what companies are looking at doing, what their aspirations are, and where there could be opportunities in the future to work together. So we know a lot of the players in that area. And I think with Core coming in and others, going back to that question, or Kinross, look, they see a ton of opportunity in this area. It's a favorable part of Canada to be looking to go to production. We know that Ontario produces almost 50% of Canada's gold. There is such a long history. We think about Abitibi, we think about this area. We know that a lot of future planning is going into the ring, or not the Ring of Fire, but the Golden Triangle, I should say. The Yukon, of course, there's really strong areas, but this has a long history. And I think about as well, when you're moving to production and you need workforce, are you doing fly-in workforce, or do you have people in the area that have all worked in the sector? And I mean, when I think about Kenora, I think about Red Lake, I think about Fort Francis, Thunder Bay, all of those. There's a lot of miners that have worked in the area and are looking for new opportunities. So a lot of those building blocks are all in place to see success when you're looking towards building a project.
Well, what's next for SEVA? Well, first of all, talk about the project itself.
Sure.
You just listed. Talk about the milestones that you plan to hit in the next couple of years, and ultimately what your objective is. Is it to sell the asset, or is it to go into production like some of your neighbors you talked about?
Well, look, we have a lot of optionality in front of us. We're focused on our property right now. We've got, whether it's measured or inferred, about 1.25 million ounces, which, we're excited about, because when we look at some of the modeling, we think there's something pretty special there already. We are focused on a DSO model, so we're not looking to build out all the required infrastructure that a big producing mine would have. We've got options both south and north of us to move our ore to those projects. We're looking to have discussions over 2026 to see if we can have agreements in place with whether it's the project to the south or projects to the north of us that could actually partner with us to mill. So those are, first of all, some of the things when we think about what the opportunity is. But we've got a huge land package, and we still think there's a lot of underexplored areas within that land package. So this year we want to be sitting in a place to get support to go back out from those communities to go and to do more exploration. We think we can grow that resource out. But with our team here and with the support that we have, we're not shy to be looking at what we could do to grow through acquisition. One of the things that's been quite nice is since people know that we're in the area, they know sort of the DNA of our company, who's behind us, who's been supporters. Because of that, there's a lot of deals, opportunities that are just coming directly to us. People are, whether it's privately held, whether it's some really early exploration that's occurred. So we have a chance to vet all of that, to take a look at, what might be a good opportunity. We're constantly hunting to see, while we're focused on moving our project ahead. And look, that'll lead to a PEA sometime in the near future. We're still early stage, but look, we think that is something that could, when the market gets to see what that looks like, there's simplicity to what we're thinking about. There's something that can lead to a lot of upside, not just for the communities around us, but for our shareholders. So look, we're pretty excited about what's here, but also excited to go and see if we can grow this. Will there be interest in a company like ours? Yeah, look, it makes sense. I mean, I think people will look to see how we de-risk, how we move it ahead, what else we find. But again, optionality, grow through acquisition, grow through exploring, or being something that is a target for others. Those are all things that, we constantly think about.
Now that you're on the other side of the table, what kind of support would you like to see from the provincial or even federal governments that may move shareholder value upwards?
Look, for us right now, everybody, like in our early conversations, I have only good things to say. We'll start to go through some deeper permitting. Mm-hmm. I think the messaging that we're seeing right now is that, Ontario is really trying to support the sector. So look, I would say we're quite happy with everything we're seeing. Kenora is a great town. The conversations we're having with people there, community leaders, business people, they're excited to see more things happen outside their community. Again, some of the smaller communities that have really relied in that area on tourism also want to see diversification, and having some operations other than we have Rainy River, but things to the north. Those are all things that even though some of them have some seasonality to them, there's some opportunity for those communities. So look, I've only had a very positive experience both in the discussions with First Nation governments, community leaders, business people, and I have no requests at this point for anything to the Ontario Ministry. We're just looking forward to continuing to move our project ahead.
Tell us about the major shareholders of SEVA Mining.
Yeah, well, First Mining holds 44%, and they're with us for the long run. They want to see they're focused now on Springpole and some of their other assets. But they want to see us take this and move it, and their leadership have been fantastic to deal with. We've got 2 appointed members on our board from First Mining. Their head of exploration, James Maxwell, and Michael Flaherty, who's been in the mining sector for decades and based in Kenora. So we've got good support and leadership from our shareholder there. And then we've got Sean Kunkun, who many know, just putting together a very significant deal between Dolly Varden and Contango, billion-dollar deal. Sean's well known throughout Canada and his work and now globally on this last deal. So he's one of our largest shareholders, and Frank Justra is our other largest shareholder. So these are people that have made the right bets previously. A lot of support. They're looking at a long-term investment here. So, again, very tightly held. We're not right now. We've got a good treasury in place. We're well funded to get the work we need to do over the next while. Of course, we'll continue to watch. There's a lot of people that are liking our story to date. They've watched our first month of trading. We're having meetings, had one this morning where people are wondering if we're looking to do financing, but right now we're happy where we are, and we're going to see what the next couple of months bring.
With everything we talked about so far, what do you think are the top 3 to 5 things that make SEVA Mining unique? A lot of what you talked about could apply to other mining companies operating in great jurisdictions, good government support, good infrastructure, good investor backing. But what is it about SEVA that stands out?
I think the team that I get to work with, we've got Ryan Brown, who's not somebody that you normally see with a smaller junior. That's head of our development team. Just an incredible guy who's working on a number of mines around the world, who's taken time, has invested in this company, likes what he sees, wanted to be part of it. Carl Ginn, multi-generational explorer in that area, who really knows and has been watching this project for a long, long time. And Helton Fan, who worked with both Cominco Tech, has worked for a lot of big players, has come into this team. So I think really you're also looking at a team that's strong. And when you bring in Sean Kunkun, you bring in Fiore, you bring in Frank Justra, that you've got that ability to actually execute on your optionality. I think there's companies out there that have strong relations within the capital markets, but I mean, that track record is what's going to speak. Has there been trust built and value created in those relationships over a long period of time? So I think that's something that's special about who we've brought. Advisors, Ryan Waymark, who many know, who's now been behind West Red Lake, Cambria, Selkirk Copper, a number of new projects in Canada. Really, really strong. And Rob McLeod, who, the famous, I guess many of your listeners will know the McLeod family from Stewart, British Columbia, having Rob as well as an advisor. So I think those are things that are really, that drive us ahead. Again, the simplicity. People are trying to do some really, really big things. This is something that I think is, I don't feel it to be daunting. I think it's something that can create value very quickly for shareholders and partners. So I think the simplicity of this would be the second thing I would think is a real opportunity. And I would say third, when we look at where we're going, there's still so much upside. And I mean, you're investing in a junior because you're looking to see really strong returns. I mean, let's be open. You want to see a return, but in many cases, you're coming to the table and you've got to hope that this could really grow. And I think from where we are, look, there's been some great drilling on the core off the asset, about 118,000 meters, but there's a lot of area here that can grow this out. So when you see the performance already that we have, let us start to share some of our findings, and I think you're really going to see some good upside. So those are things that I would want potential investors to contemplate.
What are some of the major milestones you want to see happen in the next 12 months?
I want to work to have agreements with the communities that are here and make sure they understand us and we understand them. And that
which communities, Ranj?
The four First Nations communities that we're working with. I think that's going to be key. Secondly, I want to get out and make sure that we have a strong first field season. We get all of the infrastructure that we have ready to go. We have some existing infrastructure at camp, and I want to make sure that we go out and have, strong exploration and drill. And then I would say our third is that, we want to see how we do with the capital markets. How do people, what do they think about us? If we start to see a strong season, how are and we are looking to make sure we're in a strong financial position, how the market's going to respond. How do people believe in what we're doing? So those are things I'll keep an eye on. How do we build that foundation? One, how do we continue to explore and prove out our thesis that there is more to be found here? And third, is the market looking at what we're doing? Are they believing in what we think is the pathway forward? And will they respond if we need support over the next year financially?
When it comes to making arrangements or agreements with First Native communities, like you mentioned, what is it that you think would be optimal such that the First Nations communities benefit and also investors benefit as well? Would it be a leasing agreement on their land? Would it be some sort of revenue sharing? Would it be employing indigenous people into the workforce? Would it be building infrastructure on their land as part of the agreement? What do you think works here?
Well, I think there's a number of opportunities. Like, I think there is agreements that can be made where there's upside towards or business opportunities on the exploration side. Going back to what I shared with you originally, where can we understand where there needs to be support for the communities on their goals? Some of them are building recreational activities. Some of them want to see supports for their citizens. I'm going to leave that a bit vague because we're still learning what those things are in each community. But what I can say to your listeners or potential investors, this is the work I did for the last decade, is sitting down with communities one-on-one between a government, understanding what their roadmap was, and then how you can get in there and support that work. Like, how do you make sure? So I think, that would be another part of it. Look, there's lots of things that can be done. There's great cases across the country that we'll look to emulate, whether it's joint ventures on, if we're doing some trucking, drilling, camp services, road maintenance. And then as you move forward, you start to have a dialogue about a more advanced financial arrangement. Those are the things that, that we're not at a point to talk about yet. Now, when you do think about Fiore Group, you start to think about projects like Selkirk Copper. So, we have companies in our office that have gone out and actually they're publicly traded companies with big First Nation ownership. And so there's that model, which is starting to be looked at across the country as well. So we'll see how talks progress, how relationships get built. But there's a whole bunch of different options on how you can build benefit.
Okay. And in terms of going down the line, you mentioned optionality. Selling the company is one option. This is a poll, and we'll end up here. We'll end the conversation here. This is a poll conducted by Ipsos. 64% of Canadians want foreign sales of resources blocked. Where do you stand on this? Does it matter for you personally if a foreign company were to make an offer for SEVA? Would you refuse that, or would you work in the best interest of shareholders, whatever that case may be?
Yeah. Look, I want to make sure that, I think the words I used was, I think there will be people looking at us. So my goal is to move this ahead the right way. And we think that there's something that can create a lot of value for in production, but we know there's a lot of potential suitors around us. I think, that the conversation about foreign purchasing of Canadian assets, and strategic assets. I've been around that conversation before. I've been asked to advise on some of the decisions in the country around that in previous roles, where the federal government reached out and just asked a perspective, I guess, on it. But look, every case is different. I think where it gets to be, where there's a lot of sensitivity is around critical minerals, rare earths, where we see countries trying to cobble together and hold them, under a sovereign veil. And we're seeing many countries do that. What's nice about the gold sector is the companies that tend to be looking at consolidation or acquisition. We've got great Canadian companies like Agnico, just doing phenomenal work in the country. And we have some US companies that are really deeply ingrained into the economy of Canada, whether we think about gold companies like Newmont, for instance. Core, who's south of us, is a great player, my understanding, based in Chicago, activities as well in sort of the northwestern part of the US, but also now looking to invest. So I don't think that there'll be sensitivity in the future about potential suitors. There's lots of folks who are in the public markets as well, which we have to understand what that looks like. But right now, we're just focused on early stage of building good relationships, increasing our value through a number of different avenues, and looking to see what we can do in this area and prove that the thesis we have can be achieved.
Good. Where can we follow your work, SEVA's updates, and stay up to date with the company?
Yeah, you can go to our website. Of course, you're going to be able to follow us on our news releases. But seva.com, it gives you an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper in what we're doing. And then you can follow us, whether it's on the exchange, the news releases that we're putting out. And we're going to continue to be out in the conversations that'll happen. If you're a person that really follows mining closely and you're attending any of the conferences that occur in this country, whether it's VRIC, you want to be a PDAC, you want to be, you really follow this and you're at Beaver Creek or at Denver Gold or abroad, you can see it there. And you always list my emails on our site, and I'm happy to have one-on-one conversations with potential investors or those who are interested in what we're trying to achieve.
All right, we'll put the website down below, so make sure to follow SEVA Mining there and keep up to date with news releases. Pleasure to have you, Ranj. Thank you for coming on the show, and I look forward to working with you again. Take care for now.
David, thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.